Bethesda's latest RPG Starfield has been out for quite a while now, so I feel the time has finally come to compare it to Bethesda's most acclaimed RPG, the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, to see what exactly has changed when it comes to attention to detail over the course of the last 10 years. I just want to start this video off by saying that I think Starfield is a perfectly fine game. I don't really think it's a great game, but I spent over 80 hours playing Starfield, and for the most part, I've enjoyed my time I've spent playing the game. And the reason I want to mention that at the beginning of this video is because usually when I make these direct comparison videos, I usually find a pretty good balance of things that each game does better than the other when it comes to attention to detail. And honestly, I found it challenging with this video, at least with the comparisons I made in this video, to find things that Starfield did better than Skyrim, a game that's over a decade old. And honestly, I was pretty surprised that when I went to actually record these comparisons to see that, you know, Starfield just wasn't bringing it as much as I kind of wanted it to in this video. I was honestly kind of surprised, and it felt like I was kind of punching down at the game unintentionally. As I said at the beginning of the video, I think it's a perfectly fine game. I'm not trying to take that enjoyment away from you at all, and honestly, that's why I like making these direct comparison videos, is to see what elements have been stripped away and added to games, especially when they come from the same studio like Bethesda, seeing things that were in older games like Skyrim, Fallout, and seeing, you know, how they've improved or unimproved them for newer games like Starfield. But guys, that's why I like making these videos. I hope you guys enjoy the video, and let's dive in. Beginning with Skyrim, as you can see in the Elder Scrolls V, all of the equipment that I have equipped, you can actually see on my character in third person. My shield, my arrows, my sword, you can see all of this, whereas in Starfield, the only way to see your weapon on your back is whenever you're wearing a spacesuit. Otherwise, the weapons will just disappear out of your hands and reappear in your hands whenever you equip and unequip them in Starfield. And speaking of equipment, the way loot works between the two games is quite a bit different. As you can see here in Skyrim, whenever you take somebody out, what you see is what you get. Weapons, armor, if you can see it, you can loot it off of your enemies and equip it on yourself. Whereas in Starfield, what you see is not necessarily what you get, because the only thing you're guaranteed to receive is the weapon, some ammunition, and maybe some credits. But when it comes to the armor, you're lucky if you receive a single piece of the armor that your enemy is wearing, which is a shame, because long gone are the days where you could loot everything off of your enemies, which makes the looting in Starfield feel far more shallow when compared to Skyrim. And speaking of enemies, I'm not going to necessarily say that Starfield doesn't have any enemy variety. I know there's plenty of alien wildlife that'll attack you if you get too close, and they all come in different shapes and sizes, but I will say they all kind of feel like the wolves in Skyrim, where if you get too close, they'll attack you, you take them out in 1 or 2 shots, and that's it. And even though they look different, they all kind of feel the same. Ruling out the epic dragon encounters, as I'll mention them later in the video, but the enemy wildlife has a lot more variety in Skyrim, and a lot more variety in how you actually deal with them. For example, trolls have regenerating health and a weakness to fire, giants wander the plains escorting their mammoths and will attack you if you get too close, skeletons, giant spiders, all of which feel different from one another and don't feel just like reskinned wolves. And speaking of combat, I find it interesting in Skyrim that occasionally the camera will pull out into third person and do a slow motion kill effect, which serves as a crescendo to your combat encounters. This can happen at range with archery and in close quarters with a melee weapon. But I find it interesting that there's nothing closely resembling this in Starfield. Even though the game is mostly based around firearms, we still do see these slow motion kill effects in previous Bethesda games like Fallout 4. And though Starfield doesn't necessarily have magic, I thought it'd be fun to compare the fire and ice weapons to the fire and ice spells that we see in Skyrim. As you can see here in Skyrim, when I use the Flame's destructive magic, I'm actually catching the ground on fire, and not only that, I'm leaving the ground burned and charred where the flames were hitting. Whereas in Starfield, whenever I set off this Inferno Mine, it does catch the ground on fire for a moment, though whenever the flames disappear, there's no burning or charring on the ground where the Inferno Mine detonated. The same applies in Starfield. Whenever I use a cryo mine, whenever it detonates, it doesn't leave any ice residue or anything on the ground, though it did freeze my character, whereas in Skyrim, whenever I use ice spells, it leaves the ground frozen and causes icicles. It looks really great, even today. Moving on now to the NPCs. The NPCs in the world of Skyrim will actually react to your actions in the game. Listen to how these guys react to you pulling out a fire spell.
Go cast your fancy magic someplace else.
Whoa! You know what you're doing with those flames there.
Or listen to this guard react to you pulling out a weapon.
Go cast your fancy magic someplace else. Guard might get nervous. A man approaches with his weapon drawn.
Whereas in Starfield, the NPCs will not react to your actions unless you harm them. It doesn't matter if you're shooting off a gun right next to their head or shooting up a store, the store owner will not react, or even if you're aiming a gun directly into the face of a guard, they will not react to you like they do in Skyrim.
Problem?
Which in the end makes the inhabitants of Starfield feel kinda lifeless in comparison. Moving on now to random encounters between the two games, Skyrim has this ace in the hole because they have random dragon encounters. These encounters are absolutely epic as you have no idea when they're going to happen. It could happen in the middle of a battle, it can happen while you're shopping in town, and though they all pretty much play out the same, they are epic nonetheless. When playing Skyrim, it often feels like you can't go 10 feet without having some kind of random dynamic encounter. Whereas in Starfield, it's not like they don't happen, but I feel like most of the random encounters that happen in Starfield often happen in your ship, and it's when someone either hails you over the radio or random bounty hunters or bandits try to attack you. I'm not saying that Starfield doesn't have cool random encounters, I'm just saying they're not as epic or unique as they are in Skyrim.
Alright, hand over your valuables, or I'll gut you like a fish.
Moving on now to a comparison of the water physics between the two games, and I gotta say, when it comes to characters interacting with the water, both games look great. When characters move through the water, it creates realistic looking ripple effects, and it looks awesome between both Skyrim and Starfield. But what I find interesting is whenever it comes to how things float in the water between two games. In Skyrim, as you can see, whenever I drop the sword into the water, it's heavy, so it sinks straight to the bottom. But whenever I drop lighter objects into the water, they actually float on the surface of the water and go with the current. While in Starfield, the objects you drop into the water will always float up to the surface. It doesn't matter how heavy they are. It doesn't matter if it's a heavy rifle or armor. It'll still float to the surface, and the direction of the current has no effect on the objects in the water. Also, don't touch the floating objects in the water because they kind of wig out and it doesn't really look that great. Now with this next comparison, I knew in Skyrim you don't leave footprints in the snow when you're walking through snowy environments, so I thought maybe in Starfield they finally added that you would be able to leave footprints in the snow when you're walking on snowy planets, but no, they did not add it into Starfield. But I did notice when looking at the ground that the shadows that your character is casting in Starfield are far more detailed than the ones we see in Skyrim, so that is an improvement that I did want to mention in this video. Now, exploration is an important part of any open world game, but one thing that's mind-boggling to me that's missing in Starfield that's in Skyrim is actually mounts. In Skyrim, if you're exploring and you want to speed up your travels, you could jump onto a horse and take off. If things start getting a little too hairy, jump on your horse and you're out of there. It makes traveling the open world more fun and immersive than fast traveling, while in Starfield, there's no such thing, and with all the barren planets there are in Starfield, with points of interest being very few and very, very far between, requiring lots of foot travel, something like the Sparrow that you could use in Destiny 2 that you could mount right underneath your ship would have been very cool and very useful when traversing these barren landscapes in Starfield. Moving on now to my final comparison, which is actually player housing. In Skyrim, as you know, you can purchase a home in any of the cities, or with the Hearthfire DLC, build your own fantasy-style home, and it's fantastic in that game. But I gotta say, probably my favorite part of Starfield is the ability to build your own ship from the ground up, and that serves as your home if you wanted to. Of course, you can buy a home in on one of the planets in one of the cities, but the ability to actually build your own ship that you live in from the ground up is a sci-fi element that I've been wanting to see in a sci-fi RPG like this for years, and it's perfectly realized here in Starfield. Well guys, you made it to the end, and thank you for watching. This has been my direct comparison of Starfield versus the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video as much as I've enjoyed making it for you. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Live from My Basement, where I make new videos like the one you're watching right now every single week, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future uploads. And if you feel like supporting the channel even further, go check out my memberships. There's cool perks and things over there. But guys, that's all I have for this video, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. See ya.